When my mother looked me straight in the eye and said those 5 words that would shatter everything I thought I knew about family loyalty, I felt my world tilt on its axis. "You're not welcome anymore," she declared, her voice cold as winter steel. I simply nodded, but what she didn't realize was that her dismissal had just activated something dangerous within me. Sometimes the quietest responses hide the most devastating storms, and my silence was about to unleash a reckoning that would expose secrets buried for decades. Hey everyone! Before we dive into this absolutely wild family revenge story that literally kept me up at night, I want to know, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments, because this story is going to take us on an emotional roller coaster that spans multiple states. If you love stories about family karma coming full circle and justice being served ice cold, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because trust me, you do not want to miss how this unfolds. The betrayal runs deeper than you could ever imagine, and the revenge. Well, let's just say some people really should be careful what they wish for. My name is Savannah Reed, and until 3 months ago, I believed my family was built on love, sacrifice, and unbreakable bonds. I was 32, a successful marketing executive in Denver, and the daughter who always came running whenever mom called. I had spent my entire adult life being the responsible one, the one who handled emergencies, who sent money when times were tough, who never questioned why my younger brother Marcus seemed to get away with everything while I carried the family burden. The day that changed everything started like any other. I had driven the 4 hours from Denver to my hometown of Grand Junction to help Mom with what she called some paperwork issues. Dad had passed away 2 years earlier, leaving behind what we thought was a modest estate, the family home, a small savings account, and his vintage car restoration business. Mom had been struggling to manage the finances, or so she claimed. I arrived at the familiar blue Victorian house where I had grown up, expecting to spend the weekend sorting through insurance documents and maybe updating Mom's will. Instead, I walked into a conversation that made my blood run cold. Mom was on the phone in the kitchen, speaking in hushed tones that immediately set off alarm bells. "No, she doesn't know anything about the Portland property," Mom was saying. "Marcus made sure all the paperwork shows him as the sole beneficiary. She thinks her father only left the house here in the business." I froze in the hallway, my weekend bag still in hand. Portland property. What Portland property? "The rental income alone is bringing in $8,000 a month," Mom continued. "Plus the commercial properties downtown that she has no idea about. Marcus was smart to handle all the legal stuff while she was busy playing career woman in Denver." My legs felt weak. I pressed myself against the wall, straining to hear every word. Of course she would have contested it if she knew. That's why we made sure she didn't. She always was too nosy for her own good, always asking questions about money. Well, now she can stop wondering. Everything important goes to Marcus, just like we planned. The casual cruelty in her voice, talking about me like I was some greedy outsider rather than her daughter, hit me like a physical blow. But it was what came next that truly destroyed me. She never really fit in anyway, always too independent, too questioning. Marcus understands family loyalty. He knows that some children are meant to carry on the legacy and others, while others are meant to find their own way. I stood there for a full minute, processing the magnitude of what I had just heard. My father, the man I had worshipped, who I thought had loved me unconditionally, had apparently orchestrated this betrayal from beyond the grave. My mother, who I had sacrificed weekends and vacation days to care for, was not only complicit, but seemed to relish my exclusion. When I finally found my voice, I walked into the kitchen as if I had just arrived. "Hi, Mom," I said, keeping my tone light. "Ready to tackle that paperwork?" She hung up quickly, her face flushing slightly. "Oh, Savannah, I didn't hear you come in." "Yes, well, about that paperwork." She paused, and I saw something shift in her expression, a hardening, like she had just made a decision. "Actually, dear, I've been thinking. You're so busy with your career and your life in Denver. I don't want to keep imposing on you with these family matters. Marcus has been helping me, and honestly, it's easier to work with someone local." I nodded slowly, my mind racing. "Of course, Mom. Whatever makes things easier for you. In fact, she continued, her voice gaining confidence, I think it might be better if if you didn't come around so much. Marcus feels like you're always swooping in, trying to take charge of things that don't really concern you. And there it was, the setup for her ultimate dismissal. You're not welcome anymore, she said, finally, the words I mentioned in the beginning. But now I understood they weren't just about that moment. They were about erasing me from the family entirely. I simply nodded, but inside a cold fury was building. As I drove back to Denver that night, my mind was already working. If my family thought they could erase me, steal my inheritance, and then dismiss me like an unwanted guest, they were about to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating Savannah Reed. The first thing I did when I got home was contact a private investigator. If there was a Portland property generating $8,000 a month and commercial properties they thought I knew nothing about, then there was a paper trail. And if my father had really left everything to Marcus through some kind of legal manipulation, well, I was about to become very interested in the validity of those documents. Because here's the thing about being the responsible daughter, the one who always handled emergencies and asked the right questions. You learn to be very, very thorough. And thorough people, when they're angry enough, can become absolutely ruthless. My family was about to discover that dismissing someone and making them disappear are two very different things. 3 weeks after that devastating conversation, I had assembled a war chest of information that would have made any prosecutor proud. The private investigator I hired, a sharp woman named Detective Riley Santos, had uncovered financial records that painted a picture of fraud so extensive it took my breath away. The Portland property Mom had mentioned, it was actually 3 properties, 2 rental complexes, and a commercial building that Dad had purchased using money from his business account over the past 5 years. The monthly income wasn't $8,000, it was closer to $15,000, but that was just the beginning. Detective Santos had traced a web of shell companies, falsified documents, and forged signatures that revealed the true scope of the betrayal. My father hadn't just excluded me from his will, he had actively hidden assets worth over $2 million, all of which had been transferred to Marcus through a series of sales that happened conveniently just months before Dad's death. Your brother's been busy, Detective Santos told me as we sat in her office, surrounded by boxes of evidence. These property transfers, the business restructuring, even the life insurance policies, they all have one thing in common. Your signature appears on several key documents, but according to handwriting analysis, you never signed them. I stared at the photocopied documents, seeing my own name forged in what looked like my handwriting, but felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. So they didn't just exclude me, they made it look like I agreed to give everything away. Exactly. And here's the really interesting part. She pulled out another folder. Your mother's been receiving monthly payments from something called Reed Family Holdings LLC for the past year. Guess who the sole owner of that company is? Marcus, I said, feeling sick. Marcus. And guess what? Reed Family Holdings LLC owns every single property, business asset, and investment account your father accumulated. Your mother isn't struggling financially, Savannah. She's been getting a monthly allowance from your brother, who now controls everything. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that for a moment I couldn't speak. They hadn't just stolen from me. They had created an elaborate fiction where I was the ungrateful daughter who had walked away from family responsibilities while Marcus was the devoted son managing everything. But here's where it gets interesting, Detective Santos continued. Your brother made one critical mistake. He used the business credit line to purchase that last property in Portland, which means the loan documents had to be filed with the state. And on those documents, both you and your father are listed as guarantors of the debt. Meaning legally, you're entitled to know about any and all business assets used as collateral, which according to these documents includes everything. The house, the other properties, even the classic car collection your father was restoring. I felt something cold and sharp crystallize in my chest. So, I have legal standing to challenge all of this. More than that, you have grounds for a criminal fraud case, forgery, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit theft. This isn't just a family dispute, Savannah. This is a felony. That weekend, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of immediately filing criminal charges, I decided to give my family one chance to make this right. I called Marcus and asked to meet with him and Mom for what I called a family discussion about Dad's estate. We met at Mom's house on a sunny Saturday afternoon. I sat at the same kitchen table where I had eaten countless family meals, where I had done homework as a child, where I had imagined I belonged. Marcus lounged in Dad's old chair looking confident and slightly annoyed at having to deal with what he clearly saw as my continued interference. "Look, Savannah," he started before I could say anything. "I know you're upset about being left out of things, but Dad made his wishes pretty clear. He wanted me to handle the family business, and Mom agrees. You've got your own life in Denver. Maybe it's time to focus on that." I pulled out a manila folder and placed it on the table. "Before we talk about Dad's wishes, I want to show you both something interesting I discovered." I opened the folder and spread out photocopies of the forged documents, the shell company registrations, and the property records. I watched as the color drained from both their faces. "This is Reed Family Holdings, LLC," I said, pointing to the business registration. "Sole owner Marcus Reed. And these are the properties it owns: the Portland rental complexes, the commercial building downtown, even Dad's classic car collection, which, according to these insurance documents, is worth about $300,000. Mom's hands were shaking slightly as she reached for her coffee cup. Marcus had gone very still. "Now this is interesting." I continued, pulling out the handwriting analysis. "These are documents that apparently bear my signature agreeing to transfer my rights to various assets, except I never signed them. In fact, according to this handwriting expert, they're forgeries." The silence in the kitchen was deafening. I could hear the old refrigerator humming the tick of the wall clock that had marked time through my entire childhood. "And this," I said, placing the final document on the table, "is a criminal complaint for fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. It's already been prepared. All it needs is my signature." Marcus found his voice first. "You're threatening your own family." "I'm not threatening anyone," I replied calmly. "I'm stating facts. You stole from me, both of you. You didn't just exclude me from Dad's will. You actively forged documents to make it look like I had agreed to give away my inheritance. Then you had the audacity to tell me I wasn't welcome in my own family anymore." Mom finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. We thought it would be easier this way. Cleaner." "Easier for who?" The anger I had been keeping controlled finally began to leak into my voice. "Easier for you to steal $2 million? Easier for you to lie to my face for 2 years while you collected money from properties I should have inherited." Marcus leaned forward, his confident mask finally slipping. "What do you want?" I looked at both of them. These people who had given me life, raised me, and then systematically erased me from their lives for money. "I want you to understand that actions have consequences. Tomorrow morning, I'm filing this criminal complaint with the district attorney's office. I'm also filing a civil lawsuit to recover my stolen inheritance, plus damages for emotional distress and punitive damages for fraud." "Savannah, please," Mom said, tears starting to form. "We're family." "No," I said, standing up and gathering my documents. "Family doesn't forge each other's signatures. Family doesn't steal and lie and then act like the victim is the problem. You stopped being my family the moment you decided I was worth less than money." As I walked toward the door, Marcus called after me. "This will destroy Mom's reputation in town. Everyone will know." I turned back one last time. Good. Maybe they should know who you really are. The next morning, I walked into the district attorney's office and filed the criminal complaint. By noon, the civil lawsuit was filed. By evening, the local news had picked up the story. Local woman accuses family of $1 million inheritance fraud. The war had officially begun and I intended to win. The news story hit Grand Junction like a bomb. Within 48 hours, my phone was ringing constantly. Reporters, old family friends, and surprisingly other people who claimed they had their own stories about my family's questionable business practices. The most important call came from a woman named Patricia Holloway, who introduced herself as Dad's former business partner in a venture I had never heard of. "I saw the news story," she said. "I think you and I need to talk. There are things about your father's business dealings that might help your case." We met at a coffee shop in downtown Denver, and Patricia turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who had owned an antique restoration business that had partnered with Dad's classic car restoration work. "Your father and I had a partnership agreement," she explained, sliding a folder across the table. "We were supposed to split profits from a high-end restoration project, a 1967 Mustang Shelby that belonged to some Hollywood collector. The project was worth $200,000. I opened the folder to find contracts, invoices, and correspondence that painted a picture I had never seen. "What happened to the partnership?" "Your father terminated it suddenly about 6 months before he died. Said he was restructuring his business and wouldn't need outside partners anymore. But here's the thing. That Mustang project was completed after his death. I saw the finished car at a classic car show last month, and guess who was showing it as part of his collection? Marcus." I said, already knowing the answer. "Marcus. He told everyone he had completed his father's final project. But according to our partnership agreement, I was entitled to 50% of that job. I never saw a dime." Patricia wasn't the only one. Over the next week, I was contacted by two other business partners who had been mysteriously cut out of deals just before Dad's death, a contractor who had never been paid for work on the Portland properties, and most surprisingly, a lawyer named David Kim, who claimed he had been pressured to create the shell company documents. "I want to be clear," David told me when we met at his office. "I didn't know at the time that anything fraudulent was happening. Your brother told me you had agreed to the restructuring, but were too busy with your career to handle the paperwork yourself. So you created documents transferring my rights based on his word. I created documents based on what he said were your instructions, yes. He showed me emails that appeared to be from you authorizing the transfers. I realize now those were probably fabricated." David handed me copies of everything. The emails that supposedly came from me, the shell company paperwork, even recorded phone conversations between him and Marcus, discussing the need for discretion about the family restructuring. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because I've been practicing law for 20 years, and I've never had a case where a client insisted on this level of secrecy from his own family. It never felt right. When I saw the news story, I realized I might have been an unwitting participant in a fraud. But the most shocking call came from someone I hadn't expected: my father's oncologist, Dr. Sarah Martinez. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this," she said when we met at the hospital where she worked. "But your father's final months troubled me, and when I saw the news about your inheritance case, I felt I had to speak up." "What do you mean his final months troubled you?" "Your father came to see me about 6 months before he died. His cancer was stable at that point, not cured but manageable. He could have had years left. But he was agitated, stressed about what he called family business that needed to be resolved quickly." She pulled out a file. "He asked me very specific questions about his prognosis, about how long he had left. When I told him his condition was stable, he seemed, disappointed is the wrong word, but surprised. He asked me to put together a letter documenting his condition as terminal with less than a year to live." I felt cold spreading through my chest. "Did you write the letter?" I refused. His condition didn't warrant that kind of prognosis, but I got the impression he was under pressure to expedite certain decisions. "Pressure from who?" He wouldn't say specifically, but he mentioned that his son was anxious to take over family responsibilities and that there were timing issues with some business matters. The implications were staggering. Had Marcus somehow convinced Dad that he needed to accelerate his estate planning? Had he manipulated a dying man into believing he had less time than he actually did? By the end of the second week, I had assembled what felt like a small army of people who had been wronged by my family's financial machinations. Patricia offered to testify about the partnership fraud. David provided documentation of the questionable legal work. Dr. Martinez agreed to share her concerns about the suspicious timing of Dad's estate planning. Most importantly, I had attracted the attention of Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh, a prosecutor who specialized in white-collar crime. "This isn't just inheritance fraud," she told me during our first meeting. "This is a pattern of financial manipulation that involves multiple victims and appears to have been planned over several years. Your family created an enterprise designed to systematically steal assets while maintaining plausible deniability." What does that mean for the case? It means we're not just looking at fraud anymore. We're looking at racketeering charges, RICO violations. This could send your brother to federal prison for decades. The night after that meeting, I sat in my Denver apartment, surrounded by boxes of evidence, thinking about how far this had all come. 3 weeks ago, I was a daughter trying to help her mother with paperwork. Now I was the center of a criminal investigation that could destroy my entire family. My phone rang. It was Mom. "Savannah," she said, her voice shaky. "We need to talk. Marcus says you're trying to send him to prison." "I'm not trying to do anything, Mom. I'm seeking justice for what was done to me." "Can we meet? Please, just you and me. No lawyers, no paperwork. Just mother and daughter." Something in her voice made me pause. She sounded scared, but also hopeful. Like maybe she wanted to find a way out of the mess she had helped create. "Okay," I said finally, "but we meet on neutral ground. And Mom, no more lies. If we're going to talk, it has to be the truth this time." "The truth," she whispered. "Yes, it's time for the truth." As I hung up, I wondered if this was the beginning of reconciliation or just another manipulation. Either way, I was about to find out just how deep this family betrayal really went. The meeting with Mom was scheduled for the following Saturday at a small diner halfway between Denver and Grand Junction. I arrived early, my nerves on edge, unsure whether this was genuine remorse or another manipulation. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. The confident woman who had dismissed me from her kitchen looked frail, older, like she had aged years in the few weeks since our confrontation. "Savannah," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Thank you for coming. You said you wanted to tell me the truth. I'm listening." She took a shaky breath. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. When your father first got sick, he was terrified about leaving us financially unstable. The business was struggling, we had medical bills piling up, and Marcus had just lost his job again." I waited, letting her continue. "Marcus came to us with this plan. He said if we restructured everything, put it all in his name, we could protect the assets from potential medical bankruptcies and estate taxes. He made it sound smart, responsible. And my cut. He said you were doing so well in Denver you wouldn't need the inheritance the way he would. He painted this picture of you as this successful career woman who had moved beyond needing family money while he was the one staying local, taking care of us." I felt anger rising, but kept my voice level. "So you decided I didn't deserve what Dad wanted to leave me?" "No, it wasn't like that." She reached across the table, trying to touch my hand, but I pulled back. "At first the plan was just to delay things, maybe give you a smaller portion later when the business was more stable. But then your father died suddenly, and Marcus said it was too late to change anything back." "Mom, I've seen the documents. This wasn't some temporary restructuring. Marcus created shell companies, forged my signature, and systematically transferred everything into his control. That's not protecting family assets. That's theft." Tears started flowing down her cheeks. "I know. I know it got out of hand. But Savannah, I'm scared. The district attorney called yesterday. They want to interview me about the financial arrangements. Marcus says if I cooperate with your case, I could go to prison too." And there it was, the real reason for this meeting. She was not here to apologize or make things right. She was here to try to convince me to drop the criminal case to protect herself. What exactly are you asking me to do? Drop the criminal charges. We'll work something out privately, give you some of the inheritance, maybe half, but please don't let this destroy our whole family. I stared at her, this woman who had given birth to me, raised me, and now was asking me to let her theft slide to avoid consequences. Some of the inheritance, half. Mom, you stole everything from me and then told me I wasn't welcome in your lives anymore. Now you want me to negotiate for a portion of what was already mine. The criminal charges will ruin Marcus's life. He'll never recover from this. Maybe he should have thought about that before he forged my signature and stole $2 million. Our conversation was interrupted when my phone rang. It was Jennifer Walsh, the prosecutor. Savannah, I'm sorry to interrupt your weekend, but we have a problem. Can you come to my office Monday morning, and don't discuss this case with anyone until then? The urgency in her voice sent alarm bells through my head. What kind of problem? The kind that could derail our entire case. Just be careful who you talk to, okay? When I hung up, Mom was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Something about the timing of the prosecutor's call right in the middle of this emotional conversation felt wrong. Mom, I said slowly, who else knows we're meeting today? She hesitated just a beat too long. Nobody. I just told Marcus I was going to try to talk sense into you. But I had caught that hesitation, and suddenly pieces of a puzzle I had not even realized existed started falling into place. The carefully timed emotional appeal, the focus on protecting Marcus from criminal charges, the way she kept steering the conversation away from the actual crimes committed. You're recording this conversation, I said. It was not a question. The color drained from her face, confirming my suspicion. Marcus told you to get me on tape saying something that would undermine the criminal case. Maybe admitting I was only doing this for money, or that I was willing to accept a settlement, something that would make me look like an opportunist rather than a victim. Savannah, no, I would never. I reached across the table and opened her purse before she could stop me. Inside, nestled next to her wallet, was her phone with a voice recording app clearly running. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Not content with stealing my inheritance, they were now trying to manipulate me into sabotaging my own criminal case. My own mother had agreed to wear a wire against me. 40 minutes, I said, looking at the recording timestamp. You've been recording our entire conversation. How much of this emotional breakdown was real, and how much was performance? She was crying now, but I felt nothing. The last vestiges of hope I had harbored for reconciliation with my family died in that moment. I'm sorry, she whispered. Marcus said if I could get you to admit you were just being vindictive or that you would accept money to drop the charges, it would prove the criminal case was frivolous. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. Tell Marcus he just made the biggest mistake of his life. I was willing to consider a plea agreement that might have kept him out of federal prison. Not anymore. Savannah, wait. No. You chose your side, Mom. You chose money and Marcus over truth and justice. Now you get to live with the consequences of that choice. I walked out of that diner knowing that I was truly alone in this fight. My family had not just stolen from me. They had tried to manipulate me into sabotaging my own case for justice. The gloves were officially off. But as I drove home, I realized that their latest betrayal had actually strengthened my resolve. They were so desperate to avoid consequences that they were willing to turn my own mother into a spy against me. That level of desperation suggested they knew exactly how guilty they were. Monday morning could not come soon enough. I had a prosecutor to meet with and a criminal case to salvage. Whatever problem Jennifer Walsh had discovered, I was confident we could handle it. After all, I had learned the hard way that when your own family betrays you, you stop pulling your punches. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, matching my mood, as I sat in Jennifer Walsh's office waiting to learn what new disaster had befallen our case. The prosecutor looked tired, with the kind of exhaustion that comes from dealing with too many criminals and not enough justice. Before we start, I said, I need to tell you about Saturday's meeting with my mother. I explained the recording attempt, the manipulation, and Mom's obvious coaching by Marcus. Jennifer listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each detail. "Well, that actually explains what happened over the weekend," she said finally. "Your brother's attorney contacted us Friday evening with what he called exonerating evidence that would prove this case was nothing more than a vindictive family dispute. Let me guess. They wanted to play you a recording of me admitting I was only doing this for money." "Exactly. They claimed to have evidence that you had offered to drop all charges in exchange for a financial settlement, which they argued proved the criminal charges were baseless." She leaned back in her chair. "What they didn't expect was for me to demand they turn over any and all recordings as potential evidence of witness tampering." I felt a cold smile creep across my face. "So their attempt to sabotage the case actually gave you more ammunition." "It gets better. When we analyzed the recording your mother made, we found something interesting. Your brother's voice is clearly audible in the background during the first few minutes coaching her on what to say. That's conspiracy to obstruct justice, which adds another felony to his growing list." But Jennifer's expression remained serious. "However, we do have a real problem. David Kim, the lawyer who created the shell company documents, he's been disbarred and has fled the state. Apparently, our investigation spooked him enough that he decided to disappear rather than testify." My heart sank. David Kim had been one of our key witnesses, the person who could testify about how Marcus had manipulated the legal documents. "Without Kim's testimony," Jennifer continued, "we lose a crucial piece of evidence about the fraudulent document creation. Your brother's new attorney, and yes, he hired a very expensive criminal defense team, is arguing that you can't prove the documents were forged without the person who created them. But we have the handwriting analysis, which is good, but not as strong as direct testimony from the person who actually created the fraudulent documents. Kim's disappearance is a significant blow to our case." I felt desperation creeping in. After everything I had been through, after all the evidence we had gathered, was the case really going to fall apart because one cowardly lawyer decided to run? "There has to be something else," I said. "Some other way to prove what they did." Jennifer opened a thick file folder. "Actually, there might be. We've been investigating your father's medical records more thoroughly, and Dr. Martinez's suspicions about the timeline led us to something interesting." She pulled out a series of documents. "Your father's oncologist wasn't the only doctor he saw in his final months. He also made several appointments with a psychiatrist, Dr. Robert Chen, claiming he was having trouble making important decisions due to stress and medication side effects." I looked at the appointment records, noting they coincided exactly with the period when the estate planning documents were being created. "Dr. Chen has been reluctant to speak with us due to doctor-patient confidentiality, but the medical records subpoena came through this morning." Jennifer handed me a psychiatric evaluation report. "Read this." The document was devastating. Dr. Chen had noted that Dad appeared to be under extreme psychological pressure from a family member who was urging him to make financial decisions quickly. The psychiatrist had documented Dad's confusion about complex legal documents. He said he didn't understand his distress about disappointing his son and his fear that he was making decisions that weren't in his family's best interest. "Most importantly," Jennifer continued, "Dr. Chen documented that your father specifically asked about the mental competency requirements for legal documents. He was worried that his medication and stress were affecting his judgment and wanted to know if documents he signed under those conditions would be legally valid." I felt a surge of hope mixed with sadness. Even while being manipulated, Dad had tried to protect me. "There's more," Jennifer said. "Dr. Chen also documented that your father brought copies of legal documents to their sessions, asking the psychiatrist to help him understand what he was signing. According to these notes, your father was confused about why you weren't included in the documents and asked multiple times if it was fair to exclude one child from an inheritance. So we have professional documentation that Dad was under duress and possibly not mentally competent when he signed the estate documents." "Exactly. and Dr. Chen has agreed to testify. But it gets even better. Jennifer pulled out one final document. Dr. Chen's notes indicate that your father specifically mentioned that Marcus had told him you didn't want to be included in estate planning because you were too busy with your career to deal with family responsibilities. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Marcus had not just manipulated legal documents, he had manipulated a dying man's emotions, convincing him that I didn't care enough to be included in family planning. Your father died believing you had chosen to distance yourself from the family, Jennifer said gently. Dr. Chen's notes show he was heartbroken about it. I had to take a moment to compose myself. The idea that Dad had died thinking I didn't want to be part of his legacy when the truth was that I had been systematically excluded and lied to was almost unbearable. But as the initial shock faded, I realized that Dr. Chen's testimony would be even more powerful than David Kim's would have been. This wasn't just about forged signatures anymore. This was about elder abuse, psychological manipulation of a dying man. There's one more thing, Jennifer said, interrupting my thoughts. Dr. Chen's receptionist contacted us this morning. Apparently, Marcus attended several of your father's appointments which violated standard psychiatric protocols. She kept notes because it made her uncomfortable. What kind of notes? Notes about how Marcus would answer questions directed at your father, how he would interrupt when your father started expressing doubts about the legal decisions, and how he consistently steered conversations away from your father's concerns about fairness to family members. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the scope of evidence that was emerging. What had started as a case about financial fraud had revealed a pattern of psychological abuse that made Marcus's crimes infinitely worse. Where does this leave us with the criminal case? Stronger than ever, we're adding elder abuse and psychological manipulation charges to the fraud and forgery counts. And with Dr. Chen's testimony about your father's mental state, we can argue that even if the documents weren't technically forged, they were obtained through duress and manipulation of a vulnerable person. For the first time in weeks, I felt genuinely hopeful. The truth was finally coming out, and it was more damning than I had ever imagined. What's our next step? We schedule Dr. Chen's deposition, file the additional charges, and prepare for Marcus to realize that his expensive legal team just became his lifeline to avoid spending the next 20 years in federal prison. As I left Jennifer's office that afternoon, I thought about Dad's final months, about how he had suffered not just from cancer, but from the manipulation of a son he trusted. Marcus hadn't just stolen money. He had stolen a dying man's peace of mind. But now, finally, the truth was going to come out, and justice was going to be served. The dominoes began falling faster than anyone anticipated. Within 48 hours of Dr. Chen's deposition, Marcus's expensive legal team was in full damage control mode, desperately trying to negotiate a plea agreement that would keep their client out of federal prison. The psychiatric testimony had been devastating. Dr. Chen's calm professional recounting of Dad's confusion, distress, and manipulation painted a picture of elder abuse so clear and compelling that even Marcus's attorneys knew they were facing an unwinnable case. "He's ready to deal," Jennifer Walsh told me during our Thursday afternoon phone call. "His lawyers want to discuss a plea agreement that would involve full restitution, criminal penalties, and cooperation in recovering all stolen assets." What kind of cooperation? Complete financial disclosure, return of all properties and assets, and testimony about any other family members who were involved in the fraud scheme. I felt a cold satisfaction settling in my chest, including Mom. Especially your mother. Her recording attempt turned what might have been a misdemeanor accessory charge into felony obstruction of justice. She's looking at prison time unless she cooperates fully with asset recovery. The irony was perfect. Mom's attempt to manipulate me into sabotaging my own case had instead provided prosecutors with evidence of ongoing criminal behavior that made her situation exponentially worse. 3 days later, I found myself sitting in a conference room, surrounded by lawyers, watching my brother systematically confess to years of financial crimes against his own family. The confident man who had lounged in Dad's chair dismissing my concerns looked broken, aged, desperate. The Portland properties, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. The rental income goes to an account at First National. The commercial building downtown is held under Mountain West Holdings, LLC. The classic car collection is stored at a warehouse facility outside Colorado Springs. For 2 hours, he methodically dismantled the criminal enterprise he had built, providing account numbers, property deeds, insurance information, and documentation of every stolen asset. The total value, the prosecutor announced when Marcus had finished, comes to approximately $3.2 million in property's assets and accumulated rental income. $3.2 million, more than I had even imagined. But the financial restitution, while satisfying, was not the most important outcome. The most important outcome came when Marcus finally looked directly at me for the first time during the proceedings. I convinced Dad you didn't want to be involved, because I was scared, he said. Scared that you were smarter than me, more successful, that you would see through all my failures and convince him I wasn't worth investing in. The confession continued. I had been fired from 3 jobs in 2 years. I had gambling debts. I needed money fast. And when Dad got sick, I saw an opportunity to solve all my problems by convincing him you had moved beyond needing family support. So you manipulated a dying man's love for his children to steal from both of us, I said quietly. Yes. The word came out like a sob. I manipulated him. I forged your signature. I created fake companies. I stole everything. And then when you started investigating, I convinced Mom to help me cover it up. 3 weeks later, the plea agreements were finalized. Marcus received 18 months in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. Mom received 12 months in county jail, suspended to 6 months of home confinement and 3 years of probation. Both were required to pay full restitution plus legal fees and penalties. But the criminal penalties were only the beginning of their consequences. Within days of the plea agreement, the local newspaper published a detailed account of the fraud case. Mom's standing in her small community, where she had been respected as a grieving widow, was destroyed overnight. Marcus's few remaining business relationships evaporated. They had traded their reputations, their freedom, and their family relationships for money. They were now required to return with interest. The property transfers took months to complete, but eventually I found myself the legal owner of rental complexes I had never seen, a commercial building I had never visited, and a collection of classic cars I didn't know Dad had been accumulating. The monthly rental income alone was enough to change my entire financial future. More importantly, I had learned something valuable about chosen family versus blood family. Patricia Holloway, the business partner who had first reached out to me, became a genuine friend and mentor. Dr. Martinez, who had risked professional consequences to share her concerns about Dad's final months, became someone I trusted with my own healthcare decisions. Detective Santos, Jennifer Walsh, even Dr. Chen, people who had helped me seek truth and justice, became more important to me than the relatives who had betrayed that truth. 6 months after the criminal convictions, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I donated one of the Portland rental complexes to a nonprofit that provided affordable housing for families affected by medical bankruptcies, the kind of financial disaster that Marcus had claimed to be protecting us from. The donation was made in Dad's name with a plaque that read, "In memory of James Reed, who believed in fairness, justice, and taking care of family, values that should never be compromised for personal gain." I never spoke to Marcus or Mom again after the plea hearings. They had made their choices, prioritized money over relationships, and chosen deception over truth. I had learned that biological family connections mean nothing without loyalty, honesty, and genuine love. But I also learned that family can be chosen, built from people who prove their trustworthiness through actions, rather than claiming it through genetics. Patricia, Dr. Martinez, Jennifer Walsh, and others had shown me more genuine care and support during the worst months of my life than my biological family had shown in years. Today, as I sit in my Denver apartment looking at bank statements that show monthly rental income I never expected to receive, I think about the cost of justice. Yes, I recovered my stolen inheritance. Yes, the people who betrayed me faced consequences for their actions. Yes, the truth came out and justice was served. But I also lost the illusion that blood relationships guarantee loyalty. The comfort of believing my family loved me unconditionally, and the naive trust that had made the betrayal possible in the first place. Some people might say the price was too high, but I believe truth and justice are always worth fighting for, even when the fight costs you everything you thought you knew about the people who were supposed to love you most. Sometimes the family you choose becomes more important than the family you're born into. And sometimes, when people show you who they really are, the healthiest thing you can do is believe them the first time. Now, I want to hear from all of you incredible viewers who've stayed with me through this entire emotional roller coaster. Have you ever discovered that family members were working against you behind the scenes? What would you have done if you found out your inheritance had been stolen by the people you trusted most? Do you think I was too harsh in pursuing criminal charges? Or do you believe that family members who betray you deserve to face the same consequences as strangers? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because I read every single one, and your perspectives help me process this journey I've been on. If this story resonated with you or reminded you of your own experiences with family betrayal and justice, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who might need to hear about the importance of standing up for yourself even against family. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell, because I'll be sharing more stories about life lessons learned the hard way, family dynamics that challenge everything we think we know about loyalty, and the incredible strength that comes from choosing truth over comfortable lies. Thank you for taking this journey with me, for your support during the darkest chapters, and for understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is refuse to accept betrayal just because it comes from family. I wish you all the courage to seek truth in your own lives, the wisdom to recognize genuine love from manipulation, and the strength to build chosen families filled with people who truly have your back.